All right, great. Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. My name is Kate Percival. I'm the Digital Accessibility Analyst here for SUNY Oswego. And today we're going to talk about making accessible tables and lists. I did just put the accessibility website link into the chat, and this has a lot of information, a lot of tutorials and videos. And just kind of a disclaimer before we start, this is not going to be a step-by-step instructional video. I'm just going to go over some of the things that can create accessible tables and lists. However, in the digital accessibility websites, there are tutorials and videos and such that do have step-by-step instructions. So you can scoot over there when you have time and check out some of the videos and tutorials, and you can get some specific instructions on how to do everything that I'm going to talk about today. So it's important that content is structured properly so that assistive technology can accurately read and interpret it. And by structured, I don't just mean how it looks, but I'm referring to how it is identified by the software application. And we sometimes call this tagging. So again, we're going to review tables and lists in 4 different software applications. We're going to go over Microsoft Word and PowerPoint, and then Google Docs and Google Slides. It should first be noted that I would like my slides to advance. There we go. There's the accessibility website. It's just oswego.edu/accessibility. So again, that has a lot of information on it. Tables should be used for tabular data, not layout purposes. Screen readers identify the number of columns and rows in a data table. They read column and row headers and provide table navigation. So proper markup or proper tagging allows screen readers to navigate through the table one cell at a time. So how do we make accessible tables? Well, some of the things that need to be done are you need to make sure that the headers are defined. You need to be sure that if the table happens to span across 2 pages, you want to repeat those header rows. You want to keep the table structure simple, which means you just avoid using merged cells. And if your table starts to get too complex with multiple header rows or merged cells, you may want to consider splitting it into 2 or 3 tables to keep that structure simple. And tables become much easier to work with in Acrobat if they are made accessible in the source document. And I will note that I'm not really going to go into PDFs today because they're their own sort of separate beast. Because they are not a source document, they don't always play by the same rules as things like Microsoft Word and Google Docs. However, just please know that if you use PDFs or if you plan to convert your documents to PDFs, it's much easier when the source document is made accessible first. So in Microsoft Word and PowerPoint, when adding a table from the main menu, from the main ribbon, go to the Insert tab up at the top and then select Table, which is generally right below it. You want to highlight the number of rows and columns that you'd like within the table, and then click on that grid to enter the information into your document. And then, of course, once you're in the table, you can use the Tab key to move between cells. So it's pretty simple. And again, this is the same for Microsoft for Microsoft Word and for PowerPoint. However, in PowerPoint, you may have noticed that there are these little icons in the middle of some slide layouts. This is just a secondary quick way to add in different elements. So the icon that's in the top left-hand corner that looks like a grid is the icon for a table. So if you click on that, then the little dialog box that you see below will pop up and it will ask you to enter the number of columns and the number of rows. And once you hit OK, then that will enter the table into your PowerPoint slide for you. So again, sticking with Microsoft Word and PowerPoint, we're going to define the headers. You want to place the cursor inside the table, and this will activate what's called the Tables Tools tab, Table Tools tab, which pops up over kind of on the right-hand side of the navigation ribbon. Under the Table Tools tab, you want to select Design, and then way back over on the left-hand side, you'll see the checkboxes for the header row and the first column. And you can check those as appropriate for your table. You need to have at least one of those checked to define the headers within the table. As I mentioned, if your table breaks pages, if it goes across 2 pages, you want to repeat the header rows. So again, under the Table Tools tab, and this is for Microsoft Word specifically, this doesn't happen in PowerPoint, but if you place your cursor in the table, open up the Table Tools tab, select the Layout tab, and then on the very right-hand side of the screen, you'll see Repeat Header Rows. Simply click on that, and anything that you've already defined as a header row will be repeated on subsequent pages. So both Word and PowerPoint have very similar features and tools. We're going to go back a slide for just a second. If you'll notice in the middle of this screenshot of the navigation, you'll see the Table Styles section. That appears in both PowerPoint and Microsoft Word, although it looks a little bit different. However, don't assume that just because it's a default style that the table is accessible. There's a few things to keep in mind. You want to keep the design and the color scheme simple. You want to stick with a dark text on a light background or a light text on a dark background. And some of the blues and greens and yellows and oranges and such that are in the default styles are not accessible for color. Banded rows can be useful for some people to help keep track of the information going across the rows or up and down the columns. So those can be used if you choose. Again, just be aware of color. And if you want more information on how to be aware of color and how to properly use color, you'll want to join Rebecca's session on color, which takes place this Friday at 1 o'clock. So I'm not going to dive into that either because it's kind of its own beast as well. But definitely tune in for Rebecca's session Friday at 1 to learn all about using color properly. So go back ahead a little bit. Now in Google Docs and Slides, it's very similar to the process that I just went over in Microsoft Word. From the main menu, go to the Insert tab and then select Table. And again, highlight the number of rows and columns that you'd like and then select on the grid to enter the table into the document. And again, use the Tab key to move between the cells once you're in the table. Looks very similar. Now, defining headers in Google is a little bit different. The only way that I have figured out to add headers is to run the Grackle, which is an add-on. It's an accessibility checker. There is a full session that discusses automated checkers, and that will be held next Thursday, the 21st at 1 p.m. And we will go over lots of details on how to use things like Grackle and what it should be used for and how to get it and all that sort of thing. So again, we're just going to kind of skim over this for right now. Grackle is a Google add-on. If you go to the add-on menu in the top of a Google Doc, if Grackle is not already there, search the add-ons, find Grackle, and then add it. And then you can launch it. And this menu that you see here on the right-hand side of your screen is an errors and warnings menu that pops up that tells you what needs to be improved for your document for accessibility. If you select on each error, it will open sort of the sub-menu of specifics. If you click on the locate button, it will jump to that specific error within the document. And then if you click on tag, that will open up this dialog box in Google that will allow you to check the box, either mark the first row as a header or mark the first column as a header or both, depending on how your table is being used. I have searched and played and looked, and I cannot figure out another way to get to the headers aside from using Grackle. So it's an extra step and it's a little bit of a pain, but it's there, and Grackle really isn't all that much of an inconvenience. So I would suggest going to your Google Docs and going to the add-ons menu to see if it's there. If it's not there, go ahead and find it and install it, and then it's there when you need it. So other considerations for tables. You can style the headings. Again, if you attended Michelle Thornton's session this morning about structured content and using styles and headings, you can apply any of those styles to the headers within the table. You want to try to avoid empty cells, as these are generally read by screen readers and they can make table navigation a little bit confusing. I know in some tables that I've seen, people try to use empty, like a row of empty cells to kind of separate sections of content within the tables. I would suggest against this. I would delete the row of empty cells and instead use like a band of color or an outline or an underline or, you know, something within the table content to kind of separate those sections of content. Or again, if you find that your tables have lots of different sections that need to be separated out, I would suggest considering making 2 or 3 different tables. Again, use banded rows or columns to kind of help the information be seen a little bit easier. Again, just another quick note about color. You want to stick with the light text on the dark colored backgrounds and dark text on light colored backgrounds. Stay with a simple structure. If it's complicated to read and figure out as a sighted user, you can bet that it's going to be complicated to read and understand for someone who's using assistive technology. So be aware of what your table looks like and how much information is packed into it. And then when possible, use columns for layout purposes. Again, tables should be used for data purposes. They should not simply be used for aesthetic or layout purposes. I do a lot of remediation, so I look at a lot of syllabi, and 2 things that I notice that come up in a lot of syllabi that I see that are structured in tables are points associated with each grade letter, and then the grade scoring breakdown, right? So those 2 things people generally put in a table format, but they don't necessarily need to be in a table format. And the tables tutorial and instructional videos on the website go over how to extract information. There's a really simple way, especially in Microsoft Word, to extract the information that's already in a table and put it just in a regular text, and then you can format it into columns. All right, so before we move on to lists, I see we have a couple of things coming into the chat. Let me check those really quick and see if I can answer any questions. There was one question: if we create an accessible table in Word and then paste it into Blackboard, is it good to go? Casey Raymond answered that. I would suggest trying and then running Grackle after you paste the table into the doc. Okay, that's a good suggestion. And Rebecca answered that same question: Ally will catch the issues. So yes, Ally is a Blackboard accessibility tool, or an accessibility tool within Blackboard that doesn't really fix things per se, but it can alert you to things that are going on that are a little bit funky in Blackboard. So that's a pretty good question, Jessica. Thanks for that. Thanks for that question. And
would you suggest, because you had just mentioned that, you know, some things like don't necessarily need that table, like would you say the course schedule needs it or doesn't need it from your perspective?
I think it depends on the course schedule. I have seen course schedules that they make a lot of sense in a table. Mm-hmm. They're complex, you know, somewhat complicated maybe as far as course schedules go, and they seem to make sense in a table. I've seen other course schedules that are a little more, I don't know, maybe loose is the right word, just more simplified, that could be done in a column format. So I think part of it kind of depends on your specific course schedule. What I try to do when I do see those things that could potentially be either a table or a column, I kind of either envision it, or I might copy and paste it into a new document and play around with it a little bit to see if I can make it columns easily.
Yeah.
And if it seems like it just does better as a table, I leave it as a table. And if I can easily format it into columns, then sometimes I trade it out. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, sure. All right, so I think we're going kind of quickly here, but we're going to move along to lists, and then we'll take some more time at the end to answer some more questions. So in the same manner that assistive technology can read tables cell by cell, assistive technology will also identify lists. It will specify how many items are in a list and but however, it only does that when the content is tagged properly. So simply adding a bullet or a dash at the beginning of each line or separating things by hitting enter, that doesn't tag the content as a list. Now, making lists is quite easy, actually. The only thing you really have to do is use the built-in list styles. There are two different styles. There's the ordered or numbered list and the unordered or bulleted list. I'm sure all of you are familiar of. Use the numbered list when order matters and use the bulleted list when order does not matter. For example, one of my favorite examples is a recipe. For the ingredients, generally speaking, it doesn't really make much of a difference what order the ingredients go in. They all go in the bowl, they get mixed together. So that would be a bulleted list. The directions, however, have to be in a very specific order. You can't, mash the cookies on the tray before mixing in the eggs. So you need to have that specific ordered or numbered list in order to correctly make the whatever it is you're making. So in order to put lists or to tag lists in your documents, we go to the Home tab in Microsoft Word and PowerPoint. And again, this is the same for both. Go to the Home tab, the main navigation, in the paragraph section, which is about in the middle of the screen. You'll see two icons, one which looks like bullets and one which looks like numbers. So it's pretty simple. You click on one of those, and that will create a list for you. You can either highlight information and click on one of those icons and it will automatically create a list with the information that's highlighted. Or if you're just straight out typing, you can click the icon first and enter in your information. Every time you hit enter, it will bring it to a new line. It will create a new bullet. And it's pretty much the same for Google Docs and slides. It's in a little bit of a different spot. From the main navigation in Google, you locate the list icons, which are way over on the very right-hand side of the screen. And then again, just choose the bullets or the numbers. Clicking on the drop-down arrows, you see little triangles, little drop-down arrows next to both of those. Clicking on those will simply expand a list of options. Microsoft Word has more capability to change like the bullets and the numbering structure than Google does, but clicking on those drop-down arrows will expand the list of options and will allow you to choose a different look for your list. I will also note that when you are structuring lists in PowerPoint, I would suggest to use the master slides in order to make all of the lists look consistent. And if you're not familiar with master slides, I highly suggest you check it out because it saves a ton of time in PowerPoint. Information on master slides can be found in the tutorial in the accessibility website, and there is also a video that is dedicated to using master slides in PowerPoints. So I will say just very quickly about PDFs. Again, you want to make your source document as accessible as possible. If you are converting to a PDF, do not use the save as function. You want to export your document to a PDF, and this preserves the accessibility features that you set in your source document. After exporting it to a PDF, you do want to try to check the accessibility of it. However, this can only be done in Acrobat Pro DC. It's not available in the Adobe Reader version. So again, just things to be aware of. If anyone has questions about PDFs, I can try to answer them. I know we're kind of early. I guess I spoke really quickly. But anyway, PDFs, we will be having a PDF session, let's see, next Friday, the 22nd at 11 a.m. So we will go into much more detail about creating and using accessible PDFs, which again, I highly suggest people are welcome to come and check out. That's Friday, the 22nd, next Friday at 11 o'clock. So for the time being, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, because that's all the slides that I have. Again, it went much quicker than I sort of expected, but I'm happy to take questions. Tables can be very complex. They can get very complicated sometimes. They also don't have to be very complex or complicated depending on how you're using the tables or exactly what you're trying to do. So if anyone has any specific questions, I would be happy to try to answer them.
So Kathleen, I use tables for course schedule, but I also use bullet points or number things within those tables. Am I simplifying my tables for accessibility purposes, or am I complicating it?
It's a really great question. And I'm not really sure that there's one specific answer to that, because again, I've seen kind of both tables where like the table structure itself plus the bulleted points within the table cells can make it kind of overly complicated. And in my head, I'm looking at it thinking like, I can take this out and make it into a list or columns and make it a little bit more simplified. And then there's other tables that I've seen that have kind of sub-menu items within the table cells, and it makes a little more sense. So I think if you're only sticking with 1, 2, maybe 3 bullet points within the cell, I would say that you're still fairly safe. If it starts to get, a lot more complicated than that, or if you have like number 1 and then number A underneath that, and then number, sub 1 underneath that, then I would suggest probably not using a table. But I think the bullets within the tables don't necessarily make it inaccessible. It just makes it a little more complicated depending on how much information you have in there.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, how would the screen reader read it? Would it read column, row, bullet point 1, bullet point 2, something like that? That's how it's going to read it?
For some scripts, and screen readers act a little bit differently, and I'm not an expert at screen readers by any means, but from what I know and what I understand of screen readers, they will read like the header, like column 1, row 1, apples, column 1, row 2, whatever. I'm doing it the wrong way, but it will read it one at a time, and then it will often read the column and row header and then the table cell that's associated with it. And yes, when assistive technology reads lists, it will say list of 3 items, and then it'll read the 3 items, and then it may say out of list. So it's like alerting people that you're, how many items you need to be listening to within that list.
Sure. Thank you.
I would also just add, Kate, as a supplement to that, is that when you're using a screen reader, that people have to maintain a good mental model of how the structure of the table is set up. So that's why if the complexity of the table gets too crazy, it's really hard to keep track of what cell you're in. So if there's a lot of content there, it can get really complex to figure out like what column and row you're in.
Yes, agreed. And that goes back to like the rows of empty cells in order to separate sections of content within your table and that sort of thing. Assistive technology will read those empty cells, so it can get very, very disorienting to hear empty cell after empty cell, and get very easy to kind of lose your place.
Kate, someone in the chat has asked whether or not you can talk about how to convert maybe a course schedule that might be a table into a list format.
Sure. In fact, Casey Raymond may be able to help with this. And I'm not just throwing him under the bus. He volunteered. So Rebecca, would Casey be able to share his screen? Does he have like ability to do that?
Yes.
Okay. Casey, if you are prepared and willing.
I'm prepared to show a couple things, and I can also talk about maybe converting a table to a list or a set of lists.
Sure, that'd be great.
So I'm just going to pull up a document that I've actually been kind of working on lately that right now has some lists in it. And I'm going to address Mari's questions first about the header. Is as page headers, if you do insert headers, header, or headers and footers header, it'll open a header menu where you can put whatever header information you want for the pages. This does not work for the header information on tables, but it does allow you to do that, and it propagates to every page. The other thing that I quickly wanted to show is if you have a bulleted list, and Kate indicated, you know, there's some default choices here for lists and their various indents. You can also go to Format, Bullets and Numbering, and see that same list. But if you instead choose List Options, it allows you to pick out of these 5, or you can pick more bullets. And this basically allows you to pick anything you could possibly want, and you can search, you know, by whatever kind of thing that you're looking for. And just by clicking on this box, then it puts that in as whatever the bullet is. In terms of going from a table that you've used for organization to a table or a set of lists, what I've done for a schedule when I used to use it as a table is I've really just broken it down into a set of list items. And it's a list of things where it's, let's say, week 1, comma, the topic covered, comma, and just basically removed the formatting created by the table of putting things in nice rows and blocking things out, and set it up just as a list with item after item after item. And in fact, that's kind of what I did here, where I've got the abbreviation, the name, the value, and how you might say it as well. So instead of organizing this as a table, I've just done it as a list with comma separations.
So I'm just curious then, when it was first a table, did you just eliminate the table formatting, or did you actually cut and paste the information out of the table into a list formatting?
I copied the information from the table, and then in this one I did a little bit differently, but you can generally copy the table text and then do paste special with just the values, just the text, and it strips out all the table formatting.
Okay.
This one I ended up doing some extra steps through a spreadsheet to get things compiled together, but that's way more advanced. For a simple table that you already have created, if you just want to copy the table text and then just paste it as the values, it'll lose the formatting. And I know on a Mac, doing this in Google Docs, if you hold Control, Option, Shift, and hit V, it pastes without that information. So Command, Option, Shift is just paste the values. I'm pretty sure Control, Option, Shift on a Windows machine works to just paste the values.
So with the
In
Mac,
Microsoft Word too, for anyone who's wondering, I can share my screen again real quick. In Microsoft Word, there's like a button. So I have this little fake made up table. If you highlight the table, and then again, this Table Tools tab opens up that I was talking about earlier. If you go to the Layout tab, and there's a button here that says Convert to Text, and right above it is the Repeat Header Rows. So that's what you want to use if it's going over multiple pages. If you convert to text, it'll ask you how you want the text separated. And then it basically does what Casey was just explaining. It takes out the table. So in order to format this into columns, you have to like delete all of the empty spaces in between each set of information, and then highlight the information that you want. This may not work because it's going across 2 pages. Highlight the information, and under the Layout tab is the Columns section. So you can choose how many columns you want the information to go in. So pretty
how
much.
does the screen reader read columns? I'm curious.
I'm sorry?
How does a screen reader advance through columns? Does it just read everything in the first column, then the second column, then the third column?
I cannot answer that specifically, but yes, I believe that it like reads it down the column.
Okay.
I think that is correct, that it reads down column 1 and then column 2, and Rebecca just chatted in, yes, it does. Did that answer folks' questions that were sent to me?
Thank you for that, Casey. I did not have a document prepared to share, so I'm glad that you jumped in with that. So, does anyone else have any questions, either general or maybe specific, something that you've run into with tables? Like I said, they can be a little finicky sometimes, and even working with columns takes a little bit of getting used to. But if you can dedicate the time and really take the time into learning even just these basics that I went over today about how to format tables and looking into how to format columns, how to break things out of a table and put it into columns, or using lists, it really does make a big difference. And it may not seem like a huge impact kind of thing, but it really can have a big impact on your documents, and it can make a big difference on how someone who is using assistive technology can understand them and how easily they can follow along with all of those. You know, if you have lots of tables within your document, it can make a big difference to them. So.
Caitlin, I have a question here.
Yes.
Yeah. So can you show us an example of how we can like give the students the grading scheme, not in a table, but as a list? So I have, for example, exams, quizzes, and like group projects, which comes into multiple phases. So is it okay if I use a table, or do you suggest lists? And if you suggest lists, can you show us like how is the best way to explain it to the students?
Sure, that's a good question. And of those two things that I mentioned, the points for the letter grade and then the grade breakdown scoring, the grade breakdown makes a little more sense as a table because you can put headers in it, like the group projects and the quizzes and the assignments. They can all be headers of some sort. So that in that case, that would be sort of acceptable as a table. Oops, I'm trying to put something together real quick here for you.
I have something in table format if you want to use it. I can
Sure, if you want to share
Sure.
your screen, maybe I can like talk through putting it into a list.
Pull up my old syllabus.
And like I said, that's one of those things that can kind of go either way. Generally speaking, as a table, it's acceptable and accessible as long as you just have like the header information, the assignment, the quiz, whatever, and then the percentage of how much that is worth. I have seen tables where it goes in a little more specifics, like, quizzes are worth 50%, quiz 1 is worth this much, and quiz 2 is worth this much, and that gets a little bit complicated. All right, thank you very much, Debbie. So in this case, this would be actually fairly easy. If you were to make a list, for example, you could make the task. You could have the task as the heading of the list.
Yep. How submitted.
And how submitted, yep, the due date, and then mark when completed. Okay, so the mark when completed, is that, Debbie, just a quick question, is that for the students?
It's for the students to use, right?
Okay, okay. So yes, in this example, I mean, you could almost just take this and strip the table out and make it into 4 columns. I think might be, the best thing that I can, maybe the easiest thing that I would suggest.
Okay.
And as far as making it into a list, again, that kind of depends on the structure of the content that you're using and how complicated and in-depth it is. But if you think about the overall structure of the table and how is it that you want people to read this, and then break it out of the table that way. Think of it in just a regular text form. If this, all of this information were not in a table, but it was just on a page, what would be the best way for people to read this? And you can kind of group things together and section them and make them into lists that way.
Right. So I've been taking, I already redid this part, which is the calendar. And I just did it as this was calendar of coursework was heading 1. Then I did heading 2, this information, heading 2 under that, all of this, heading 2, or heading 3, I can't remember. But I did it as these were separate headings under each week.
Sure.
But then I found that I was literally like cutting and pasting each cell up into the whole document.
Right. Well, again, and in Microsoft Word, you can use the extract the information. If you wanted to take that out of the table, use the extract information from underneath the layout tab, and you could pull it out that way, and you wouldn't have to necessarily cut and paste it each piece. But
so if I now have this, these are like, this is heading, or this is, must be heading 1. And this is heading 2. Then under each week, I'm going to list the topics for the week, the readings, and the assignments due. Is that what you're saying?
This is right here is a great example because compared to comparing how things look in a table versus this right here, I would prefer to see this version. And I think this type of version is a little bit easier to follow along and read. So even though you're repeating like the topics for this week, the readings due for class, you're basically repeating all the headings in list format.
Right.
But it breaks it down and it simplifies things and it makes it a little bit cleaner sometimes, just aesthetically, for someone to look at and to read. And then for assistive technology, they would just read heading 1, calendar of coursework, heading 2, week 1, content for the week, whatever, heading 3, topics. And they would, continue on that way.
But what I'm trying to figure out is how do I quickly take this mess and migrate it into what I've created up above? Because what I did do last night was created this whole thing for each week. And now I'm going to go through and cut and paste each of those parts out of every week. Is there a faster way to do it? Is it using that?
I will say that the extract content feature is nice to just get rid of the table structure. However, that can sometimes make just as much of a mess because you need to go through and section it all together and, lay it out. So in your case, unfortunately, you may be better off just copying and pasting the cells and putting them where you want them in the document.
Right. Okay. Thank you for letting me take the time to do that.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And Mohammed, I believe that you asked that question. Did that kind of answer what you were looking for?
Yes, that was very good. Yeah, that was very good.
Good.
Can I piggyback on quickly, Kate?
Yeah, please.
So I just stripped some info out of another document that I made a list schedule wise. What I might consider doing as a list, like you've shown, is you've got your week or your date that it's due. I saw topic, and then you had a whole bunch of topics. So you could copy and paste those there as a sub list. So this is a list within lists.
Right.
And then you could have reading and do a set of those.
Assignments due. Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
And so when I do, let's say assignment, if I could spell, assignment due, well, that's in the wrong place because that should be kind of the same as topics and readings. So I'm going to go back to the assignment 2, blow this up a little bit. So I'm on the assignment due.
Yep.
And up here, I'm going to decrease the indent.
Oh, got it. I could never figure out how to do that. So that's what those are.
Yep. And so then this allows you to continue down. And so you would just copy this kind of structure. You already kind of have it there in the document you made where you were applying headers and so forth. But instead of applying the headers, you're going to make them lists and just use your increase or decrease indents to get that structure, and then just copy the blocks out of your table and paste them into that list.
Excellent. Got it.
We do have the drop-in session that's coming up next at 2 o'clock. And there will be, I believe, a couple of other work group members available there. So if you do have other specific questions that pertain to your individual like syllabus or, you know, whatever, you're welcome to come in at 2. We do have to close this meeting out so they can save the recording, but then reboot it at 2. It's the same link. You're welcome to come in and join and ask any other specific questions that we might be able to help with. Yes, I see Jean Halligan.
When I saw Debbie's bigger table, if I were a student and maybe I didn't have any needs for accessibility, I might want to print that table on as few pieces of paper as possible. When I teach online courses, I usually say for the course schedule, you might want to print this out, but the way that we're doing it here in the seminar, it becomes a very, very long document. Is it appropriate to offer it both ways?
Yes, it's never not appropriate to offer it both ways, I would say. It depends on how much how much work and how much content you want to put into it, but it's absolutely acceptable. So say within Blackboard, you could have 2 links. You could say like accessible syllabus, or I don't know how you would read it, how you would label it, like a syllabus with tables or a syllabus with a list or something like that. And you would want to know whether they were like Word documents or PDFs or whatnot. But yes, you could absolutely have 2 links. Again, just as an example, within Blackboard for students to choose whether they want to look at it online or whether they want to pull it up and print it off.
Okay, thanks. Because I always like to print it for myself, but I don't want 20 pieces of paper on my bulletin board. So.
Sure. And again, identifying it as a print version, as Casey just noted, yes, identifying it as a print version might be a good approach or a good idea as well. So yes, it's never not appropriate to have both sides of things. So that's a great question, and I appreciate you bringing up that point, Jean. Thank you. We just had a question. Can we share the PowerPoint with the group? I assume, Jenny, you mean like after the presentation? I can talk to Rebecca and figure out how to share that. It won't be immediate, but we can definitely get it up. And again, all of the information, the screenshots actually that I took for that PowerPoint can be found within the tutorials on the accessibility website, which is oswego.edu/accessibility. So you're welcome to go there. You can choose the different software application. We have tutorials for all 4 of those: Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Google Docs, and Google Slides. There is also tutorials and video and whatnot for PDFs. So yeah, you can definitely get all of that information from the accessibility website. And I do have videos on a lot of those as well that break down the steps into like 3 to 5 minute little videos. So you don't have to sit watching a video all day long about how to make tables or PDFs or whatnot. It's all kind of broken down into little baby steps. So they're easy to digest and easy to follow along with. So I would highly suggest looking those up when you have the time. And again, at 2 o'clock, we'll be kind of back here again. If anybody has specific questions that they want to bring up, you're welcome to bring those at 2. So I appreciate everyone being here and spending time, and I appreciate all the questions. We do have a few more minutes if anyone else has another couple questions or 2. Okay, well, it looks like the crowd is silent, Rebecca. So perhaps we can be done a few moments early, and then we'll reconvene at 2 o'clock and see who else has questions.
Sounds good. Thanks, Kate.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here today.